Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit, and it's my pleasure to bring you another interview, breaking the cycle of RPGs that have been on my channel on a fairly consistent basis over the past few months. We're going to be talking to someone about a shooter. Yes, indeed, folks. You might remember a game called Section 8, and if you don't, then it might have passed you by, but you may be pleased to know that Section 8 is getting a sequel. It's called Prejudice, and the company developing that is Timegate. I have someone from Timegate in the studio with me to talk about it today. Welcome.
Hello.
Excellent. So, who are you, and what are you doing here?
My name is Brett Norton. I'm the design director at Timegate Studios, and I don't know, I was told to come here and talk about Prejudice.
Sounds like a plan. I think we can go with that for the time being. So why don't you give me a little bit of a rundown of what exactly Timegate have done in the past?
Okay, so Timegate started up in 1999, and our first few titles were actually real-time strategy games. We worked on a game called Kohan Immortal Sovereigns, and then we released a standalone expansion into that, and then a sequel called Kohan 2, and a World War II RTS called Axis and Allies. And then after that, we went on and started to make a genre shift into the shooters. We worked on a couple of expansion packs to the Fear series for Vivendi called Fear Extraction Point and Fear Perseus Mandate. And after that, we broke out and started working on our own original IP shooter called Section 8, and we're here following it up with a sequel called Prejudice.
Now, why don't you give me a 101 for Section 8? For those who've never heard of it before, they have no idea what's going on. Obviously, they're seeing some footage in the background. Maybe they're getting a little bit of an impression of it. But run down the key features. Tell me what exactly is the very core design philosophy behind Section 8.
Well, Section 8, we really wanted to set out to make an awesome online multiplayer shooter experience was kind of our goal there. And we wanted to target something that was a sort of a bit more large-scale, big team battle-styled multiplayer shooter, something more in the veins, you know, in the trend of Planetside or Tribes or Battlefield series. Something much, yeah, something a little bit more towards that spectrum, although not quite as large as Planetside. We're not an MMO. So, you know, that's kind of what we initially had set out. That was our core essence. That's what we had targeted. We were always a very multiplayer-focused game, and so that's kind of what drove us to make Section 8. Was we really wanted to come out, and we felt that there was a lot of room for innovation still there, and we really love those styles of games. So we jumped in feet first and tried to figure out how to do it.
Indeed. Now the game. It did all right, certainly. It got some mixed reviews. Most of them were fairly positive, but it would be fair to say that it wasn't a blockbuster breakout hit. So, bearing in mind that the original Section 8, it looked very good, so it's not like it was some two-dimensional indie game. We're talking about something with some real horsepower behind the graphics engine, obviously fairly high budget, pretty high fidelity. Bearing in mind that it wasn't a absolute smash, how exactly did Timegate manage to get the go-ahead for the sequel?
Well, Timegate is actually we're an independent developer working out of Houston here in the United States, and we actually are relatively self-funded for a lot of our internal projects like this. And so after we had wrapped up Section 8, we actually began working on some DLC, and during that time we also started developing the PlayStation 3 port. And as we were developing those, you know, we had learned just an absolute ton from developing Section 8. We'd improved remarkably, I think, as developers, and we were very eager to kind of jump in, and we really wanted to use all that awesome experience and make something even better. And so we started tossing around ideas, and we really came up with kind of what turned out to be Prejudice. And so fortunately, again, for us, that being you know, independent and having enough financial stability to put out a sequel to our own IP was really excellent. And we're actually looking at handling a lot of our own publishing efforts here for Prejudice as well. I think that we're actually going to be the publisher for that on quite possibly all the platforms.
Yeah, I noticed that, actually. I was thinking, and as I was looking and doing my research before, I was like, hang on a minute, it wasn't the original published by South Peak? And then I'm noticing that it's possibly that Timegate's actually self-publishing that. That actually leads on to an interesting point, then. If you're self-publishing, you're going to be going down the route that a lot of more self-published games are going lately and prioritizing the digital distribution platforms.
Oh, we definitely think that digital distribution is a big wave of the future. And like we had, when we did Section 8 for the PlayStation 3, we actually went entirely digital with that already. So we've got a lot of hands in that, and we've been looking very heavily at the digital space. So I can't go too much into the distribution plan since we haven't fully revealed them all just yet. But I would definitely say that, yes, we're seriously looking into very heavy digital distribution for Prejudice.
Excellent. Right, so The original did get quite a bit of criticism, so we're going to go into it, but first a fairly standard opener. It's very unfortunate when this happens for certain games. People just dismiss it offhand because they get this weird impression of what they think the game is. And in reality, that's actually an entire unfair assessment that's based on surface-level observation more so than anything. So some people actually went as far as to just simply dismiss it as a Tribes ripoff, or some other people went on to say, oh, it's just generic burly Space Marine shooter, 135. So we know better than that. But what would you say to convince the doubters that Section 8 is actually sufficiently different? What sets it apart from other multiplayer-focused shooters?
Well, we're not really like any other multiplayer-focused shooter. We set out and we didn't want to make, X existing game plus one, or base it in a space that was already, extremely crowded. Like, we didn't want to do a modern warfare game simply because there's tons of games already being built around, current modern-day conflicts, etc.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we wanted to pick something that kind of gave us the sort of the gameplay leeway to try a lot of interesting new things. And, we wanted to do the dropping mechanic, especially from the get-go. And so we knew that would probably push us towards a sci-fi basis, and that's kind of where we stuck. I was like, hey, we're going to pick a sci-fi basis, and we're big fans of the sci-fi, just general fiction and everything like that. So we did what we could to innovate as much as we can there. And we, although we have some mechanics like jetpacks and such that are obviously very popularized by games like Tribes, we don't really play like any of them. And that's kind of where we try to make our hallmark, is that our gameplay is not anything exactly like Tribes. It's not anything exactly like PlanetSide. It's not like Halo. It's not like, Battlefield, and it's not like a Call of Duty game. So we have a lot of elements in there that you might recognize from other games, but in no case did we simply just say, hey, our formula is this existing game plus one. And we definitely tried to do as much as we could to innovate on both gameplay, art style, visuals, etc., and just build something that was both pretty easy to get into, but at the same time was never really a clone of anything else.
Indeed. Now, there might be a couple of concepts that confuse people, so just to help people out, to give them a bit of an impression of what Section 8 actually involves, why don't you tell me exactly what a DCM is?
So the DCM was one of the things, it was sort of an original concept for Section 8, and what we wanted to do was kind of have this ongoing battle that it's two sides facing off, a bunch of players running around on a fairly large battlefield, and we wanted to have, sort of not really optional sort of and distraction style objectives that shake up the gameplay. The real goal there was to have different mission objectives occurring during gameplay that would ensure no two games ever played out the exact same way. So that, like, you're playing on a map at one point and things are going pretty well, and say like an outpost mission starts, and for the outpost mission, there'll be a beacon that appears in the usually in the midfield area. Your team has to go over, activate the beacon, an outpost deploys at that location, and your job is then to defend the outpost for, like, say, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Enemy team, though, receives a counter DCM, and that counter DCM is to blow your outpost up. So apart from the sort of the standard game type mechanics, which is a little bit of like capture and hold, you have this like sudden defend and destroy objective that appears in the middle of the battlefield, and your team has to think about, okay, hey, are we going to send guys out there to try to blow it up? We're going to send out guys out there to repair it. Do we kind of stay focused on this? And because the DCMs never play out in a set exact order, that's why they're called dynamic combat missions, is because it's very different on a per level basis. No two ways of ever playing out the same map are ever exactly the same, and the order in which the DCMs play out, how they play out, are always very, very different. So you get a very, very unique experience each time you play a map.
Indeed, and I expect we're going to see a few different types of DCMs in Prejudice. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, we can go into a little bit. We've talked about some of this stuff, and so for Prejudice, we sat back, we looked at the DCM roster from Section 8. We ended up kind of cutting/changing a couple of the ones that we didn't like or were kind of least popular, or we felt that we could just make outright better, and we added several new ones into that. One of the ones that people have actually kind of spotted from looking at some of our screenshots and asked a bunch of questions, which I'll talk about, is like we have this mission's called the Jammer mission, and this large wide area sensor jammer drops from the sky and hits an area, and it's actually invulnerable. You can't just shoot it and destroy it, but you do have to capture and hold it. So it plays out a little bit more like a King of the Hill style gameplay, where both teams can kind of go in and try to wrestle for control of it, and you have to own it for a set amount of time. It's like whichever team basically winds up owning it for like about a minute winds up gaining possession of the jammer. So that's for example, one of the new DCMs that's hit the roster. An example, one of the reworked ones is that we had this kind of a bomb mission in Section 8, and it was pretty simple. Just pick up a bomb from one of your control points, take it over to an enemy base, plant it, and then detonate it. The only problem with that is it kind of put a lot of constraints on where we could place the bombs, what kind of areas made sense to have the bombs delivered to. So we reworked that entirely and turned it into what's more like an airstrike marker mission now. So now you actually can basically haul over an airstrike designator to an area, and then an airstrike flies by and demolishes the entire base. And although, not only is it way cooler visuals, but it opened up a lot better gameplay options to us, because now we're not trying to figure out how to cram bombs into strategically vulnerable locations inside bases. It's more like, okay, hey, we can have more fun with this. We can put them in better gameplay locations, and then we'll just have an airstrike come in and blow the whole thing up.
Excellent stuff. Now, like any good developer, obviously criticism of your previous titles is something that happens internally, as well as you listening to the external reviews and what the players are saying, what the journalists are saying. So, while you were in the design phases of Section 8 Prejudice, surely something came up, some really big flaw with the original that you were desperate to fix in Prejudice. So, what would that flaw be, and how are you going to address that?
Well, can I actually cheat and talk about 3 topics around that? Because I think it's worth going into kind of each one. Since we're really huge critics of our own work, and we looked at Section 8 and we didn't basically sit there and go, oh, man, we are perfect, we are amazing, we did nothing wrong. We looked at that and we're like, hey, we had a ton of things that we want to improve. We have great ideas for improving all this. What can we do for Prejudice that will really kind of hit it home? One thing we wanted to do was improve our controls a lot. And so we went back and we basically revamped a lot of our control schemes pretty heavily for all the platforms. Redid a lot of things like our aim assistance, redid a lot of things just like our sensitivity settings and scales, etc. And spent a considerable amount of time on that. And I think we really did an amazing job. I love the controls. Basically, I can play it on across all 3 platforms now in Prejudice, and I just have a complete blast with it. So I'm very proud of what we've improved on that for Prejudice. And other kind of area of critique for the multiplayer crowd is that a lot of people in the multiplayer space wanted a better sense of persistency, a better sense of progress and development. We have a pretty good stat system and an amazing stats portal, but at the same time, we wanted to add in a lot of more depth in the equipment roster. It basically, the popular term is obviously unlocks, but at the same time, we had to figure out a way to do that without turning the game into, okay, whoever has the most unlocks is kind of the best. So we spent a lot of time looking at our weapon and equipment pool, figuring out ways to add depth to that, but making sure that they were more like parallel depth as opposed to, just straight up linear progression depth. And so we actually, I think, came up with a really, really good series of solutions for that. And, we've been doing a lot of testing and everyone's having a blast. And the result of it gives us just way more content in our weapon and equipment pool than we had in Section 8. Like Prejudice, Section 8 had, I think it was six weapons and 7 pieces of equipment. And we have, a magnitude of like 4 or 5 times that for Prejudice. So it's just absolutely vast, the number of things that we've improved there. And kind of last area I'll jump into is that although we did have a short single-player component for Section 8, a lot of it was kind of focused on a bit more of a tutorial element and kind of getting players used to the multiplayer space. It wasn't sort of its own unique beast. And for Prejudice, we wanted to change that. We wanted to go in, take something on the single-player / campaign end and really build that up, build a much better narrative and a much cooler fiction around our game, and use that, put in a lot of great custom content for it, have a ton of fun boss fights and unique scenarios that we could do there and leverage all the advantages of a single-player space. So kind of a long-winded answer, I know, but I think each of those 3 areas, each of those 3 areas were kind of like, sort of from a general gameplay end, a multiplayer space and a single-player space are some of the hugest issues that we wanted to tackle with the game.
Okay, well, you did mention the single player there. Now, I think it was very telling that in the original, I believe multiplayer was the first option on the menu and single player was below that. So it's not unfair to say, of course, that it was primarily a multiplayer-focused game. But let's just assume for a second that you decided not to go all out with the single player. Do you think it's actually okay these days for people to release what may or may not be a full-priced, high-fidelity commercial title, whereby the single player is, simply a tutorial for the multiplayer? And more to the point, do you think that the market actually is willing to accept that?
I think that the market is growing to accept that. It's very difficult to say right now because I think we're kind of in between the former and the latter, and it's this interesting period of transition where you do have players that they only play multiplayer, and they love multiplayer, and they get it. Even on the consoles now, they get multiplayer very, very well. You know, I have friends that purchase even major shooters nowadays that and all they play is multiplayer. They don't even bother with campaigns anymore. And so that's a growing segment. And as we've seen the kind of the shooter market just still continue to grow and grow and grow over the past several years, the audience is maturing, and they're starting to realize that they can start, buying games that are more specific. Like if you like multiplayer shooters, hey, you can buy a multiplayer shooter that doesn't have a single player component if you wanted to. So for us, being still a very, very heavily multiplayer focused title, it's very, I think that's a great thing for us going on. And I definitely think that you'll continue to see shooters developed for the completely online only space that are entirely multiplayer focused. But I will state the one area of that where you can't necessarily maybe get away entirely from sort of single player or offline elements is a lot of it comes down to not just tutorials, but sort of introducing and rolling people into just both the mechanics and the fiction of your game. It kind of depends on how different you are, the type of things you want to do differently. And when you throw someone into a competitive environment, it's not always the easiest place to toss someone to say, hey, here you go, competitive environment. Here's a bunch of players that might be hardcore fans of the series or just otherwise really, really awesome shooter multiplayer players. And you want to be able to somehow figure out a way to ramp them into it so that they have fun from day one, still figure out all the cool mechanics and quickly jump in and start figuring out, oh man, here's all the different things I can do in the game. This is amazing.
Yeah, indeed. The complexity of the original is something that was mentioned as both a pro and a con. For instance, I like very complex and very different multiplayer titles, but other people are easily overwhelmed by them. As well as the single player, what exactly are you planning on doing to help people get into that, and also to encourage people to play as a team, since this is not, as far as I can tell, the kind of title where lone wolf gameplay is going to get you very far?
Well, no, lone wolf gameplay is not something that we feel like in most cases, since it's a team base, it's you win by completing objectives. That's really what you have to get out there and do. And we do what we can. We have a lot of little systems in the game, from squads, et cetera. You can always see, we have squads that players can form, move around with, et cetera. You can always see where your squad mates are. You can spawn on top of your squad mates as well to help kind of assist in attacking objectives with the other guys. We have standard VoIP over squad, et cetera, for all the platforms. And to help encourage players just to sort of do those objectives, we spend a lot of time refining our HUD, trying to figure out ways to minimize information flow where we could, and streamline the number of objectives that occur simultaneously to put a better focus on completing this, go here and do this is a good thing. And so there was a lot of little HUD tweaks and little elements like that we did to help streamline that. And for the multiplayer components as well, we also have a built-in kind of tutorial system that starts explaining some of the more complex multiplayer mechanics. It's context sensitive though. You come across a sensor array and there's a short little tutorial that gives you a 1-sentence snippet kind of describing what's going on. And so we've done as much as we can to try to layer some of that depth in, so it isn't all presented up front. You just don't walk into a game and you're bombarded by 50 million tutorials all at once. But as you kind of come across things naturally through gameplay, you'll start learning more and more about it. That's context sensitive and appropriate.
Excellent. All right, going on to a couple of criticisms of the original title. I want to see if you've addressed these in the sequel. So the first one is the fact that that's an interesting quote. Yeah, let's go with that one. So, apparently, some of the vehicles handle like a block of steel on a ski. Has anything been done to sort of address the vehicle controls?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the areas where we did spend a lot of time. Kind of going back to the kind of the controls argument earlier, vehicle controls. A lot of people got frustrated, especially with the tanks. Is I think the one you're kind of referring to there. And so, not only did we have we expanded the vehicle roster in Prejudice, but we've revamped the controls. And it's not actually just the controls, but it's the handling and it's the motion and the movement of a lot of the vehicles went under intense scrutiny. Everything from how they move over obstacles. And one of the things that, for example, we did for the tanks, since a lot of people were commenting on they managed to get it lodged into weird places by driving off cliffs and things like that, we actually ended up adding basically underneath thrusters that allow you to sort of maneuver the tank slightly to get it over smaller obstacles, or if you manage to drive off a cliff and T-bone it into a fence, that sort of thing. So that's an additional maneuverability thing. But we also added several vehicle control schemes for some of the more complex vehicles where, for example, consoles actually have a completely different default control scheme than the PCs. You can actually, from the options, select different control schemes based on just kind of what you like. Okay, hey, I like this type of control scheme, or oh, hey, I like this type of control scheme. But as opposed to Section 8 where we just had one, we've actually gone through and now have, I think it's 3 different control schemes that you can select from for vehicles. And again, we kind of tried to pick the best control scheme for each platform to give players a lot more customization there.
And speaking of customization, obviously, since a lot of my viewers are PC gamers, I would hope that we're going to be seeing full control customization on the PC platform.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, with Section 8, we had a full binding set schemes, etc. We never shortchanged bindings when it comes to PC players.
It's really sad that I actually have to ask that question these days.
Yeah, we preserved all that and everything. Like, with Section 8 and both in Prejudice, we have a robust key binding system you can go through. You can remap the keys, etc. Everything that we can allow you to remap, we have a big remap. And not only can you have primary keys for remappings, but there's secondary remap keys for everything too, just in case you like to double bind something.
Fantastic. That's what I like to hear. Now, as regards to another one of the criticisms, and this sort of goes into the way that the shield system worked in the original, and perhaps it's just an unfortunate side effect of that, and this is something I felt as well when I played it, that a lot of the weapons seemed to lack punch. It was a lot of just sort of taking away from a bar and watching a shield bar go down and things like that, and I know that some of the weapons worked a little bit differently, but are you doing anything to address that in the sequel?
Yeah, that kind of comes back a little bit to the accessibility curve and kind of looking at how we can kind of get the game to play a little bit different too. But we took a long, hard look at that, and one of the things that we realized was that players coming into it didn't realize sort of the optimal kill ranges of a lot of the weapons. It's kind of the topic that you're talking about, and
indeed,
what really drives how easy it is to kill people in Section 8 was that there was optimal kill ranges for a lot of the weapons, and some of them, well, they were very, very different. And if you didn't kind of learn the optimal kill ranges for each of the weapons, it would sometimes cause a bit of challenge. We felt that if you knew those, you could actually fight quite effectively, but it took players a while to kind of learn those. So for Prejudice, we spent a lot of time reviewing those mechanics, trying to figure out what we could do to change it, and we actually put in fairly radical changes to that system that involve redoing how a lot of the weapons functioned. We actually mostly did away with the kill range idea concept and replaced it with what we think is a better and a little bit more flexible system. It ties into how we do now a lot of the weapons in the game and the new number of weapon unlocks. It deals with different round types that are more or less effective against shields and armor, but it's less based on optimal kill range and distances, for example. And that, I think, has not only made it just a lot more intuitive to get in and start basically tearing people up, but at the same time, you kind of get a better sense of, it's just a lot better sense of like, okay, hey, I know how to kill this guy. I don't have to kind of the mechanics are much more transparent while still giving us like a ton of depth. Because now we have weapons, for example, that are more effective against shields or more effective against armor. And we have a lot of like cool little side effects. Like if you tag somebody with an EMP grenade, not only does it do a huge amount of shield damage, but it also will drain things like their jetpack energy.
Excellent. Now, platform-wise, I heard PC 360 and PlayStation 3. Are we still going to be having 32 players and dedicated servers like the original?
Oh, yeah. We're planning for, this time around, we're planning for a simultaneous, multi-platform release. We're going to have, all three hopefully out here on the exact same day. And we're still doing dedicated servers for all three platforms. And we still have the functionality to allow players to host dedicated servers on the PlayStation 3 and on the Xbox 360. So if you're a console clan, you can actually host your own server for practices, scrimmages, tournaments, matches, etc. And that way, hopefully, that's just kind of our way of trying to help bolster the community and build up a better sense of place there.
Excellent. That does appeal to the... It's sad to even call it old school gamer in me. This is something that was commonplace a few years ago, but these days not so much. That's great to hear. It really is.
The kind of funny thing is that it's obviously very common on PC shooters, and we really like the mechanic itself. We like the ability for people to kind of like get involved and like again hosting like a sense of home or having like a residency online, place you go to hang out with your friends. And so that we've been trying to build that up, and I think that you'll probably see a lot more companies start to do that because of the online space on consoles, especially, starting to take off now. And people are starting to realize, hey, yeah, there's a lot of value in this. The players want it now too. The audiences are maturing a lot, and the demand for that kind of stuff is getting more and more every year.
Yeah, I certainly think there is a swing going back in that direction, not least spearheaded perhaps by Black Ops, which has helped an awful lot. But hopefully we will see people start to bring server support back in, and maybe servers they can actually host themselves. Now, one last question before we cut this one off, and thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to us today, and perhaps one is a little bit cheeky, but perhaps after Prejudice, is it entirely unreasonable for me to hope for a Kohan 3?
We're still huge fans of Kohan, and I really want to do one. At this point, we're trying to figure out, like, how can we do it? What kind of game can we make out of it? How's the RTS space doing right now? We've even toyed around off and on throughout the years with trying to figure out, hey, can we do a Kohan game on the consoles, that sort of thing. I actually think that you actually could, because one of our advantages is that we weren't quite as much as of a specific micro-heavy game as a lot of other
No, it wasn't.
RTSs.
It was very much group-based, as I recall.
I've done a number of design treatments where it's like, this is how we could translate our RTSs to consoles, and also, like, do PC versions and stuff, of course, as well. But it's been an interesting gambit. But I really hope at some point that we get a chance to revisit it, because I thoroughly enjoy all of the RTSs that we did. They were a very different sort of breed of RTS, and I love it. And I hope that we get another chance to make it. But for now, we'll just have to wait and see how it goes.
Fantastic. Prejudice coming sometime in 2011. We don't have a specific release date yet.
Early.
There you go. Early 2011 is about as close as you're going to get. Keep an eye on it, folks. And, of course, keep an eye on my channel. No doubt there will be a review of it once it does come out. Thank you ever so much for coming on the show today, and best of luck with your title.